Got a text in here from Rogers who refers to Coach Musselman as a genius. It says Coach Musselman is a genius in the college basketball world. And he thinks it's unbelievable to have him here. I think every Razorback fan would agree. I think you pretty much agree about the coaches for all the teams right now. But Muss has the front stage and the spotlight and everything. Connor O'Gara joining us from Saturday Down South. And I think you probably would agree, Connor, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote about how I would take Musselman over any SEC basketball coach for the next decade. And, you know, that would suggest that there's some recency bias at play there. But, I mean, even if they had lost in the Sweet 16 to Gonzaga, which myself included was a pretty popular prediction, I still would probably say that just because of how different these two teams were, that he got to the Elite Eight, kind of the lost in the shuffle thing about both these Elite Eight runs is that, like, in each of them, you had your best player, your best scorer at least, not really have a good tournament. You know, like Moses Moody wasn't really good in March last year. J.D. Note, ever since the Kentucky game, hasn't really been like peak J.D. Note. And still, he finds a way. And to me, that's the mark of a good coach. And yeah, Arkansas fans should be fired up by the fact that they look like they have Eric Musselman for the long haul.
Well, they're just an entertaining team, too. If you get to back-to-back Elite Eights, you're going to be really entertaining. So how quickly do you move on? Now that all the SEC teams are done in college basketball, do you focus too much on the Final Four as a sports writer, or do you do a little baseball now?
Yeah, I'm pretty much going to be dialed into spring football now moving forward, which, you know, I don't mind that. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, despite the fact that Mizzou already had a spring game, you know, I'm still kind of getting my feet wet, getting into some of these storylines with quarterback battles that we'll talk a lot about. Transfer portal, which is kind of all over the place. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of news with that in the next couple weeks here, especially with that May 1st deadline kind of approaching. And then we'll talk draft stuff too. I mean, I don't really get into a whole lot of baseball stuff until the College World Series. I'm not immersed in it like you are, Phil. But I do think that it is kind of wild to see an SEC baseball series play out like the one that we just saw. And I wasn't dialed into it, but the one that we saw over the weekend with Tennessee and Ole Miss, I know our readers are very much consuming that content, and that's something that we on Saturday Down South have taken it a much more significant. We're trying to have a much more significant presence in the baseball world, but there's always stuff going on in the SEC.
Mizzou had a spring game? Arkansas is not even having a spring game. They're just having a practice and putting it on Plus TV. You know, which really
isn't normally spring games just practice in the first place. They don't follow any format anymore
with some sort of weird score format kept.
I'm glad there's some pushback. There needed to be some pushback because the over analyzing of spring games is, it's rampant. It really has gone to a different place in the last few years, just because I think they have the ability now with these networks, with SEC Network, with ACC Network, you know, with all these different conferences that can actually show them. And with ESPN essentially having so many different rights, they're like, hey, why wouldn't we want to show original content? And I think maybe we've realized that these games are so impossible to keep up with scoring. And there's definitely a market for them. I'm not saying there's not. And I like being able to actually see some of these guys play out. You know, a guy like Jaden Daniels, who just transferred to LSU. I'd love to see kind of what he looks like side by side with Miles Brennan. I think that there are some interesting battles with some of the running backs and looking at how some of these guys are going to be able to kind of emerge and maybe get that primary feature back workload, all those different things. But yeah, I don't need to sit here and break down like Auburn's 3 deep on a Saturday in April. I just don't. Some will, but that's not my thing. I think all that goes up in smoke once games actually start happening.
Yeah, Connor, I'm in the camp of, I used to pretend, because I thought that was what the good fan and the loyal fan did. I used to pretend that I liked spring football. I used to pretend that I cared about the spring game. But I hate spring games. I really do. I mean, deep down to my core, I cannot remember the last one that I went to, and I was like, man, I'm so glad I went to that. That was the most fun I've had in months. Can't wait for the end of August, beginning of September, because they are boring. I mean, just the nature of them. They don't make any sense. There's no real format. A team could be driving halfway down the field, and coach blows his whistle, and we switch teams, and it's it's just useless. And I get when you look at some of the bigger programs of, it's a free event. For some people, it's the only time they ever get to actually go to an event at that stadium. So I get that for them. But for me, it is boring. And for somebody that has to write about it, does it feel tedious to you of trying to do spring games? Because it is what most fans want to hear about.
Yeah, and that's what I try and do it for. I mean, there are things that I will actually try and monitor and, whatever spring game that we're actually able to see, because some of these teams now, when they have a new offense, they're like, I don't want this to be out there. I don't want people getting an extra look. And coaches are paranoid, of course, and they don't want you to see much of anything. And so they're running, base defenses, and we're not really seeing how these guys can get pressured. And, even some of these quarterback battles, we don't really get that good of an indication of them, because you have some guys who probably won't even be there who could win starting jobs. I mean, Will Levis is a great example of a guy last year who, Will Levis wasn't being talked about in spring football at all at Kentucky. And they're like, yeah, Bo Allen looks like he's going to be the guy, maybe Joe Gatewood. And then, Will Levis comes over from Penn State, and they're like, oh, this is clearly the guy. It's not even close. And then he's kind of a revelation in fall camp. So I could dig into some of these things more in fall camp. And now we're going to have coaches playing semantics, trying to protect their quarterbacks from leaving with the transfer portal. And we're going to see all these different things thrown out there. So guys are going to be, being propped up, gaslit, if you will. It's going to be smoke screen season, not only with the NFL draft, but with spring football as well.
Oh, it definitely will. And when it comes to off-season writing, and especially during the hot months of June and July, right before SEC Media Days, you don't really have a lot of stuff to really go off of. And one thing that a lot of people like to do, including myself, is to do the list and to make top 5 and top 10 and then or all 14 lists around the SEC. Is there anything that you could actually see this spring that would change your top 5 list, say, for top 5 quarterbacks in the SEC?
Probably not, unless one of those guys gets hurt, of course, or something like that. But look, I'm ready. I'm ready for all of the oh my God, KJ Jefferson is in the best shape of his life. Have you guys seen the Instagram videos? He looks incredible. He looks like a man on a mission. I'm ready for all that. I'm here for that. I don't mind that at all. But I'm probably not going to change any of my rankings that I came out with, which, in case people don't have these burned in their brains, they didn't necessarily get them tattooed when I came out with them. I had at number 1, of course, Bryce Young, and then Hendon Hooker at 2. I went KJ at 3, and then Will Rogers at 4, Spencer Rattler at 5. Now, those are subject to change, of course, and those were really preliminary type things, but I don't really expect to be watching these guys in spring ball and be like, oh, yeah, have you seen the connection that Spencer Rattler has with Josh Van and Jaheim Bell? Oh, man, I got to move him up a spot or something like that. No, I'm not going to get into that. I think that we'll need to see kind of what that looks like in the fall and see the way that these guys develop. And for now, though, yeah, the lists are great content, and we'll probably continue to roll out a bunch of them on Saturday Night Stuff.
Because people either love you or hate them for them, right?
Oh, God. I mean, look, I love that people actually care about it, though. I'll say that. The fact that, when I had Pittman on about a month ago, and he's bringing up my guy Brad Crawford's ranking of KJ about being the 14th best quarterback in the SEC, they remember that stuff. They absolutely do. When they tell you that they don't, and that they don't really take anything away from that, can't get too high, too low, don't tell me that wasn't a motivator for KJ and that he didn't actually look at something like that, which he tweeted about, and say, all right, I got to prove some people wrong. Here's how I'm going to do it. And he played like a guy who was trying to prove some people wrong. So you know what? Maybe they do serve a purpose, and maybe there is some significance with ranking season.
See, you can help the SEC lean one way or the other, Connor, just with the typing of your fingers. You have that kind of power. I'm trying to figure out a Final Four in college football that would rival a Final Four that we've got in college basketball, as far as tradition's concerned, the coaches that are involved, and of course you got I'm thinking coaches right now. You got to get Pete Carroll to come back out of the NFL for some,
he's got to go back to USC.
We'll see how long Lincoln lasts, but you get Pete Carroll with USC, fine. Give another 5 years or so, Urban Meyer can get a job somewhere. I don't know. and Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. But for Bill Self, for Coach K, I don't the Hubert Davis part obviously is the one aspect of this coach Final
Don't forget
Four.
about Jay Wright. He's won two natties.
I know. I was going to say his name. I just moved on to Hubert Davis. That's the one thing. It's like one of these things is not like the other, the old Sesame Street song.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the crazy thing is in college football, so few guys have rings. Think about it. Think about how small that list is and how tough that would be to actually have a college football playoff. You'd essentially need at this point, in terms of the active coaches, because Urban's not active anymore. You have Dabo, you have Saban, you have Kirby, obviously, and then after that, you're kind of looking around. You're like, we get Mac Brown, Jimbo Fisher. I guess I don't really know. It wouldn't have that same type of feel because those guys aren't at their respective programs. That's a different thing about college basketball too. Is that these guys that have been with their respective programs for so long, for multiple decades, and in college football, that's just extremely rare. I mean, we sit here and we praise Nick Saban for being at Alabama since 2007, and it's like, well, I mean, that's barely longer than Calipari's been at Kentucky. And that feels like a relatively recent move as something that happened in the last 12 years. So, yeah, it's just a totally different dynamic. But, yeah, college football, if it had a playoff with Bama, Ohio State, Notre Dame, and then maybe like a USC or something like that, that would kind of be the equivalent of what it feels like we have with this Final Four.
Well, the equivalent to Hubert Davis in college football in this, with a program with rich tradition and recent success, is Marcus Freeman.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and it's somebody who didn't necessarily take the most traditional path to that job. Usually, you don't go get a job like Notre Dame, having no head coaching experience, and he was able to do that. Usually, you don't get a job like North Carolina as somebody that doesn't have head coaching experience. But Hubert Davis did that. Now he's the first in the 21st century, at least I saw, that to make the Final Four in his first year as a head coach, and now trying to become like what Kevin Ollie did year 2 at UConn, where he won a national title in 2014. I don't think that we'll be talking about that with Hubert Davis by the end of next weekend, but I guess you just never know with these things, and I think that it does kind of go to show you there's just more than one way to skin a cat.
To keep the basketball football connection going, especially with this year's March Madness, who's the football equivalent of St. Peter's? Who are you going to make mad today?
There is none, because basketball can be such a random game at times, and there's no football equivalent. There's not. It's unfair to say Cincinnati. Like, Cincinnati's going to have maybe 6 guys get drafted. Like if you want to make the comparison of like, mid-major or whatever, it's like, no, I don't really. I predicted Cincinnati go to the playoffs. St. Peter's came out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there really is nothing quite like that. And if there is an undefeated team at that level, I mean, like, I don't know. They're probably playing at the Division II level. They're not like St. Peter's, who didn't have a single win over a power conference team in the regular season and then come into the NCAA tournament. I mean, there really is no comparison. Although I think we need to get someone at least to change mascots away from the Tigers or the Wildcats and just adopt the Peacocks. And kind of embrace
I'm all for it. We need more Peacocks in college sports for sure.
Well, there's enough NBC stations to sponsor university somewhere.
Yeah.
For sure. Connor, thanks
Great
for your
point.
time. Appreciate you.
We're finally here. The top teams in college basketball have been determined, and the Final Four is set. Looking to wager on these games or the national championship? Head over to betonline.ag on your desktop or your mobile device and sign up today to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use our promo code BLEAV to get started. That's BLEAV. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all your updated odds and info, along with player props and new contests throughout the year. It's the best source for all your sporting wagering needs, including live betting and everyone's favorite Vegas casino and poker games. It's super easy to get started, so join today. Learn why everyone is saying BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on sports. BetOnline, where the game starts.